A hub for commerce, storage, and industrial fabrication, Deep Space Station K-7 was a Federation outpost in operation from the mid-23rd to early 25th century. Built by Starfleet and operated by a civilian staff, K-7 featured 30 decks and 3 large outboard modules, mainly used for storage and manufacturing. It had 2 docking bays for small starships, a limited number of crew quarters, and a very popular bar. What's up, plastic addicts? Welcome to Jason's Space Dock, where sci-fi kits come to life, skills are sharpened, and every mistake is a lesson. So I actually wasn't planning on building this K-7 here. The idea for revisiting this kit actually came from watching some unused blue screen footage from the original Star Trek. In that series of clips, there was a little bit of K-7, and I noticed something I hadn't before. The silo, the grain silo, was an add-on very similar to the outer arms. I reached out to Rose Model Company to see if they could design a silo for 3D printing. At the same time, I happened to be chatting with Jerry at HDA Modelworx, and he was working on a Shuttlebay. So I introduced HDA and Rose, and they collaborated to create a complementary set of parts. Together we decided I'd build the kit using these pieces, help to proof out the parts, and develop video build instructions along the way. And it's been fun revisiting this kit with fresh skills and a fresh approach. I want to take a moment to thank HDA Modelworx for sponsoring today's video, but more on that later, including a special offer. Deep Space Station K-7 holds a unique spot in Star Trek history. It was the first non-starship space structure ever to be seen in the franchise. It debuted in the classic second season episode The Trouble with Tribbles, and aside from reused footage as Starbase 6, it never appeared in live-action Trek again. The station's design didn't come from a sci-fi sketchpad either. In 1967, Gene Roddenberry passed along a set of concept models donated by Douglas Aircraft to model maker Richard C. Dayton Jr., best known for building the original Enterprise, and he modified them into what became K-7. It's a simple design, but with deep roots in Trek production history. First up is classic box art, which is a lot of fun. The back has some photos of finished model, a bit of detail. Now here's the clear domes. These have raised lines. I will be sanding for my build, but we are going to talk about that a little bit later. The 2 halves of the central dome and central hub, and the lower pod, which has the Shuttlebay in it. And of course the outer spokes and pods, and there are 3 of those. A decal set, a name and some identification mark, and a 5-step instruction sheet for if you omit the Enterprise. As for the accessories, we have paint mask, we have the 2-piece Shuttlebay, there's the lower and there's the top. The decals for the Shuttlebay, which is a nice touch, so you can just make the whole thing. Little teeny tiny shuttles, and we're going to use those to talk about scale a little bit later as well. And the assembled grain silo from Rose Models / HDA Modelworx, and where it will mount onto the upper dome. Sadly, I didn't capture any audio for everyone's favorite part, the sprue snap, so let's have a little musical interlude and look at all the parts before assembly. To properly light K-7, you want to open up these ports on the outer pods, and that's where those lenses go on top of. As you can see, it starts sealed, so I've used my Dremel with a grinding tip to open that up. A bit of inconsistency, but it'll still work, as you can see here. This may be repetitious for some, so I apologize for that, but I'm running white LEDs with a 3 to 3.2 volts input, and I'm using a 470 ohm resistor to step down the either 9 or 12 volts depending on what I use for power source. Here I am pre-tinning the leads on both components and trimming down the positive lead on the LED to attach the resistor to. And then I just trim those both down for space. I'm using wire wrapping wire, red and black, just for simplicity because I've only got the one circuit, and we'll solder those on, and then we'll repeat that a number of times. The outer domes all get a 3mm hole for 3mm LEDs. The center one is getting a 5mm because I need a bit more light for that dome. But they just get dropped in and hot glued in place. Pop a little dome on there before we do a light test, which I should have done first. Here we are, the light works. For the beacon light, I'm using an 0402 SMD. Here I've actually hot wired the wire in place and positioned the LED so it's pointing outward. So we got good light transference there. And this is just an example of the wiring in each dome. What you don't see here is there will be a fiber optic strand run up there to the dome as well. We'll cover that later. And test the circuit, make sure everything works, and we're good to go. Obviously, I went ahead and did the assembly off screen, but this is all half pieces. All the spokes and domes are halves, and the center hub is half, but it has a little locking mechanism for the arms in the middle. What I want to show here is that I actually used Dridex. You can see some red, I used some spot putty, but by and large, I've used Dridex as my filler here. And the thing I like about it is it can be shaped with water, and it's also much cheaper than perfect plastic putty and more readily available. So I just used a Q-tip. Now, as you can see here, it's not perfect after the prime coat. This will all be tuned up before the final assembly. So just a quick review of the parts. We have the Shuttlebay, a clear 3D printed piece that comes in two parts. We have the bottom and we have the top, which is where the lights are. The decals, of course, we talked about very briefly, and we'll get into those in depth. And I forgot to show this, the paint mask for the lights. And I'm just going to remove these from the print raft. Because these are clear parts, they'll need to be light blocked. So I am putting down these these light masks first. I'm doing the inside, then the outside, so I've got dual layer, and I can get full light blocking coverage of the part. And then this is just for test fitting. And then figure out the fitting inside the Shuttlebay. Now pay special attention. This is upside down, and I'm going to keep making this mistake over and over again. The shallow piece is the bottom, so the light should be on the other side of the roundel. Removing the Shuttlebay door is actually a two-step process. First, the door has to come out, but you can see this casting is inside the kit-supplied piece. When looking at your Shuttlebay, you also want to make sure the floor is below the Shuttlebay door so it sits properly in this piece. What I've done here is mark where the Shuttlebay edges fall, because this door actually needs to be widened as well. So use a couple tools for this. The hobby knife, so I can just score the plastic, so I'm going to snap that out. But I'm going to use the razor saw to cut the sides down before snapping that door out. With the pencil line is just a guide for myself for cutting. Once you have the right depth, because it's styrene, you can just flex this door out after having scored it. And be sure to double check your fit, that the ceiling lines up with the top of the door and the floor is below the edge. And you'll need to do some cleanup work. Once the Shuttlebay door is out, you're still going to want to remove this extra material from where the casting was inside the kit-supplied housing. The reason for that is so that on the other piece, the shallower piece, there isn't a gap between the floor and the edge. So this is not a particularly complex task. I found it worked very well with the Dremel and the barrel sander. Once I marked where I had to do the cut and just follow that pencil line, and once again do lots of test fitting. So I've went ahead and glued this in temporarily to make sure everything lines up. So I'm happy with my ceiling and I'm happy with my floor, although the Shuttlebay piece is upside down in here again, as will continue to happen. Remember, the deeper part is the ceiling part. Once all the prep is done, you can go ahead and light block and paint this, which I did off screen, and then install the decals, which is pretty straightforward. Wet it, place it, wipe it or dab it with a paper towel or a Q-tip, and then apply microsol or microset depending on your needs. To light the Shuttlebay, I opted to use a single strip of chip on board LED tape. Now this is really bright, and I could have used standard LED tape, but I chose to go this route to have more even lighting. At this point, you can go ahead and install the Shuttlebay and run your wires through the lower part of the Shuttlebay housing and test fit and glue it all together. And then of course I retested my lighting before moving on to assembling this onto the station. Very important. Now take a look here. See this unevenness in the Shuttlebay floor? I do want to talk about that because this was my first attempt. Because these were prototype parts, I didn't have any instructions, so I took a little bit of guesswork, and I actually cut the Shuttlebay higher, the door, pardon me. I cut the door opening higher than it should have been, and that caused a misalignment between the Shuttlebay housing halves, which resulted in there being a step between the Shuttlebay floor and the lower part of the Shuttlebay housing. That's why I keep saying it's very important to test fit this at every step to make sure you get this alignment right. Because when you put this on, you're going to see you're getting a nice perfect fit. The ceiling is aligned with the upper part of the door opening, and the floor is aligned with the edge of the lower panel. And that's exactly what you want. So take it slow, test fit repeatedly to make sure you get it right. And if you don't get it right, you can fill it or add styrene. There are options if you do get into trouble. Well, this puts us about the halfway mark, and here's just a look at the K-7 as it roughly stands right now. I already went ahead and sanded these domes, because that's how I'm going to have my finish, but we are going to talk about using the original domes untouched versus sanding and the results, and how it comes down to preference. This is just to provide a direct comparison between the unfinished dome with all these raised grid lines on it, which I think are out of scale, and the sanded dome, which I think is more accurate and a little easier to work with. The reason why there are two masking sheets is to give the builder options. These are designed to fit between the raised grid lines on the kit supplied parts, so you could just very quickly lay down some masks and have windows on your K-7 space station without having to deal with all the trouble of sanding it smooth. And this gives you the basic idea of the results you're going to get, but it doesn't look too great, and if we go closer you can see it pulled up a lot of paint. I ran into this problem on the smooth caps as well, and I am going to talk about that and what happened and why. And this is the sanded smooth dome. I used 150 to get the raised lines off, and then 400, 800, 1000 wet sand to smooth it out. And here is the window mask sheet. These, as you can see, are much different from the other ones. They're rectangles 1 by 2 millimeter, and that actually lines up very well with the window size on the 1000 scale Enterprise. That, combined with the size of shuttles and Shuttlebay, makes me think that K-7 is actually a 1000 scale model, not 7600 scale. Anyway, we're going to get these guys all on here, and then I'm going to off-screen do the painting, light blocking, and then remove them. And as you can see, some clean lines, but I got a lot of bleed on this. And I couldn't figure out why, what was going on with these. So I went back to the documentation. As it turns out, there was a procedure I did I should not have done, and that was causing the ripped paint, the residue to be left behind, and just a bad result overall. It was this. I used a heat gun to speed up the curing process between paint layers. As it turns out, you cannot do that with these window masks. It will cause the mask to fail, and that leads to, as I said, paint bleed, adhesive residue being left behind, not clean edges when you remove the paint masks. So read your documentation all the time before you start, and do not use a heat gun with these paint masks. Maybe any paint mask, just to be sure. And to provide contrast, here's my next attempt. This was multiple light coats, I think about 8 coats of Stynylrez black primer, naturally dried between coats. Luckily it sets off fairly quickly, and I think it's safe to say, even looking at it now, my results are much, much better. But let's throw some light on this and see how it actually turned out. That is so much better. Look at those nice clean lines. So take your time, and lots of thin, light blocking coats. And one more pass since we're here. I'm going to use one of the outer domes. Same procedure. Now, of course, I've also wiped these down and cleaned them off and kept my hands washed because we don't want finger oil on there. But lots of light blocking primer coat, followed by some light base coat. And then I'd already flashlighted this before, but we're going to go ahead and put the dome on. Pop that on, make sure the fiber optic goes through the hole I put in the top. Get her positioned. I left a blank spot for the KA or KC. Turn the lights on, and yes, that is the way to do it. Take your time, many light coats, and you'll get these nice, beautiful results. The silo might be the simplest of all these mods to do, and it's the one that I think has the most impact. You got this huge blank spot on the back of the main dome where it looks like something's supposed to go anyway. When you receive this, it comes with this long neck, long tube, so you can cut it to size, and the bottom comes as a separate piece. This is 2-piece on purpose, so you can run add either light and a fiber optic. In my case, I just ran the strand of fiber optic right up into the upper dome, but you have the option of doing either or. And I use 1mm fiber optic from the fiber optic store. Just gonna run that through there, pop it through the bottom, and that'll be glued together. And with the exception of dealing with the seam and trimming it down, the silo is essentially done. So I've determined the length, marked it, cut it with the razor saw to keep the dust down. Sand it as smooth as possible. We want to try to keep that as a 90-degree cut so it's not angled in or out or up or down or whatnot. And then glue it onto the hull. There is some filling and sanding required around the edge and a little bit around the bottom of the silo where the lower part of the dome goes on. But it is really straightforward. These high-quality, cleanly cast parts bring the K-7 model closer to what we saw on screen, do a lot of the heavy lifting on this build. HJ Modelworx is one of the few shops out there that's dedicated entirely to sci-fi model making. They specialize in the stuff that takes your build to the next level. LED lighting, paint masks, decals, resin upgrade parts, photo etch, display bases, and even full kits. Whether you're trying to fix a kit's weak spots or add screen-accurate details that weren't in the box, chances are they've got what you need. So if you're thinking about upgrading your own K-7 or anything else on your bench, head over to hjmodelworx.com and use promo code JasonSpaceDoc to get 10% off any order over $50. That's right, spend less, make better models. That's not a bad deal. Now, this is my own edition. When I'm looking at the screenshots and the few video elements available of K-7, I noticed that there was a flashing light at the top of the antenna. And I figured the best way was to recycle parts of the antenna. So I'm really only replacing the middle with a little brass tube. Fortunately, I can't remember the size. I apologize. So I've cut that to size, reamed it out, make sure there's no sharp edges. This is the bottom. I'm drilling a hole for the 1mm fiber optic to pass through. And I'm using a 3mm drill bit here to just get a little bit of depth so I can get the tube in and glue it and make sure it is as straight as possible. Pop that back in there and then add some glue because I'm happy with that. That turned out all right. And same with this ball on the top. I'm going to cut that off because I'm going to salvage the ball. This is a little harder because it's really hard to hold on to. And I had to do a little bit more work to get the roundness back because that was an imperfect cut. And there is also the mold line on it. So it actually took a surprising amount of work. Again, 1mm hole for the fiber optic. This was very difficult to do. And there we go. We got that through. And same thing, 3mm drill bit just to get a little bit of depth in there to be able to mount the rod. Get rid of any plastic bits. Do a test fit. Looks pretty good. Add some glue again, and there we go. There is the completed antenna assembly ready to go on. Let's pop it on, give it a test fit. Everything looks pretty good. Again, add some glue and make sure it is as close to 90 degrees as possible. It's a little off. I'll need to flex that back, but that's not a huge issue. Bit more glue around the edge. Trim that fiber optic down a little bit so we don't have a bunch of excess hanging out. And test lighting, we have good light transmission, so we are definitely on the right track with this. And it's just a nice addition that doesn't take a lot of effort to do. I'm sorry I lied to you earlier. The model wasn't actually half assembled. I put that there through the power of editing. enough of that. Anyway, this is kind of the ground up build up. The Shuttlebay assembly, the lower roundel, whatever you want to call it, assembled, put together, where it's basically a pass through for the wiring, because we've got the cob LED strip in there. So we got the circuit running through there, and next that's going to run into the central hub. So I just need to trim these wires down to save a little space, because it is tight in both of them, as I've done multiple times before. Going to pre-tin these wires and drop in some heat shrink tube to protect the connection once it's made. And same thing on the central hub. Going to pre-tin those wires. Now this sort of had to get a bit creative to hold these wires together, so I'm using a tweezers to hold one straight, like one in place. The negative cooperated a bit more, just stayed where I wanted to. So those are soldered, and we're going to heat shrink those to make sure connections are protected, and we can work on getting the central hub mounted to the Shuttlebay assembly. So I'll get a little bit of glue in there and kind of feed these wires through. The heat shrink side is actually going to be in the Shuttlebay assembly. There's more room in there. So we'll get that in, and I've placed the hub where I want it. I've got an opening to the Shuttlebay, and you can see the fiber optic sticking out of the top of that, as well as the main circuit wiring. And do a light test, make sure everything works before moving on. Keep testing your lighting, I cannot stress that enough. I had to add an extra LED for the fiber optics, so this is me just wiring it into the existing circuit where the feed was going to the 5mm LED for the top dome. Anyway, gonna get these guys wrapped and then soldered and get some heat shrink on them before moving on to creating the collar for the fiber optics. As I've done before, I'm using a 3mm styrene tube, connecting it with hot glue. Give it a little tug test there. Because it's a perfect size for the LED, and I can get several strands down the tube. So I'm getting these trimmed all to the same length, and a little bit of wet sand just to make sure we get as much light transference as possible, and slide those into the collar, and the last couple to go to the other areas. Test the light, make sure it is flashing. Didn't use a circuit, used a blinking LED, and I know the rate is wrong. This whole model was about testing things, so a little bit of acceptability there. And I am using low temperature hot glue so it doesn't damage the fibers. Here I got to be super careful because crazy glue will destroy fiber optics, so I had to be very careful getting the glue in the mounting hole. The marker lights are pretty straightforward. As I'd mentioned in the earlier section of the build about electronics, these are simply 0402 SMDs pointed outward. But rather than keep a huge inventory of different colored lights, I tend to just buy whites and use Tamiya Clear to get the colors I want, because it's usually red or green. In this case, there's a blue as well. So I am actually getting paint onto the SMDs themselves. Sometimes takes a second coat just to make sure you get enough coverage to get the light intensity you want. Once I'm happy with that, I went ahead and moved on to applying microcrystal clear to hold the outer lenses on. And once that's popped on, make sure it's positioned properly, and checking light transference just in case the lens needs some clear paint applied to it. As anyone who watches my videos knows, decaling is my favorite part, because I enjoy doing decals, but it also signifies we're getting close to the end of the build. And there's not much to say, because we already covered decals before, so I'm going to put on some more music, because my good friend, Addicts, makes some fantastic synthwave tracks, and I am very keen to share them. The fit and finish on this model aren't terrible, but they're not great either. I didn't cover much of the sub-assembly process, but here's my advice. Remove the alignment pins and glue the halves together manually. That's your best shot at getting most of the ribs to line up properly. Aside from that, the kit goes together reasonably well. The rod mount inside the station is a little flimsy, though I've never had a failure with it, but the central hub where the arms meet could definitely benefit from some epoxy reinforcement. The hardest part of this build was running the fiber optics, but that's only because I wanted to keep everything internal. Fitting the LED and 5 fiber optic strands into the upper clamshell was a tight squeeze. If I were to build another one, I'd do it like my first attempt. Mount the flashing LED in the base and run the fibers straight up through the support rod. Much easier. As for the aftermarket parts, I highly recommend. They turn what is essentially a bland, inaccurate kit into something far more interesting and display-worthy. Whether you use the aftermarket parts or not, I strongly recommend lighting the kit. It's super beginner-friendly, especially if you skip the fiber optics. It's a great opportunity to build up your lighting skills, and if you're already experienced, then the return on your effort is tenfold. Well, if you made it this far, thank you for watching all the way through. I hope you enjoyed my build of the AMT K-7 space station. I approached this build with a middle ground in mind. Affordable, accessible, and packed with enough mods to make it feel like something special. The upgrades are simple enough for beginner or intermediate builders, and super straightforward for more experienced hands. At the end of the day, how you build your model, and what you choose to modify, is entirely up to you. This is your artistic outlet, and there is nothing more rewarding than expressing yourself through the process. If you're in the area, I'll have this build on display at the Toronto Prop Expo on June 21st. Come by and check it out, and if you see me, please say hi. Model building is all about the journey. Every kit presents its own challenges, but each one is an opportunity to expand your skills and create something one of a kind. So keep creating, enjoy the process, and remember, it's not just about finishing the kit. It's about mastering your models step by step.